Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to let everyone give another minute or two for everyone to join. But while we're waiting, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and maybe tell us where you're joining from today. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. Thank you for attending today. My name is Lacey Hensley. I'm the director of the Institute for Coordinated Community Response. Let's get started with a few housekeeping items. We encourage you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout today's presentation. The speakers will be taking questions throughout and we'll be monitoring that box for you. If you'd like to make comments or interact with the speakers and fellow attendees, be sure to use the chat box. And if you have any technical difficulties, you'll select the all panelists option and I will try to assist you. So a little background about the Institute for Coordinated Community Response. We were created in 2018 as a program of the Conference on Crimes Against Women. ICCR is a training and technical assistance program whose mission is to work alongside rural communities to improve their collaborative systemic responses to domestic violence. ICCR hosts monthly webinar trainings geared towards the needs of rural practitioners. In all of our trainings, we work to center the unique needs and strengths of rural communities while providing practical skills and tools that can be immediately implemented. Although our trainings are geared towards rural needs, our trainings are relevant to any practitioner who is committed to eradicating domestic violence. So thank you for being here today and for your dedication to improving your own community's domestic violence response. You can learn more about ICCR on our website, www.instituteccr.org, and I encourage you to sign up for our e-blast to stay in the loop of all the great trainings that we have throughout the year. Now on to today's presentation. I'd like to take a minute to introduce you to today's speakers. We have Dagondon Tiegs, a bilingual social change advocate at the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. They are a proud queer immigrant from the Philippines. Dee works as a community organizer with Black, Brown, and Indigenous and queer trans folks in the Treasure Valley. For the Idaho Coalition, Dee works with domestic and sexual violence advocates in providing services to youth from underserved rural communities. They serve national technical assistance on teen dating violence awareness and prevention with a deep bench of academics, advocates, and community organizers. Welcome, Dee. And Jessica Moreno, LCSW, Managing Partner at Collective Capacity Consulting, LLC. Jessica grew up in the movement to end violence against women, starting as a youth activist, for a local domestic and sexual violence organization. Over the last 16 years, she has continued that work as a protective order advocate, adolescent counselor, youth programs developer, data analyst, and community builder. She has worked for local, state, and national organizations, all centering the experiences of young people in intergenerational approaches to community building and violence prevention. She channeled this experience into becoming a nonprofit consultant, partnering largely with violence prevention programs across the country who provide direct service and/or prevention partnerships with youth. In her free time, she serves as a board chair at Jane's Due Process, a reproductive justice nonprofit serving teens across Texas. She also enjoys river trips, hikes, and raising her puppy, Pepita. I'd love to see pictures at some point of Pepita. All right, thank y'all so much for being here. I'm going to stop sharing and take it away.
All right. Hey, y'all. Let's see. Can y'all see this screen? All right. Let me get to my end of it. Welcome everyone. Thank you, Lacey, for that great introduction and grounding. We've been following along in the chat, getting to know who's in the room today, and we're excited to be here to celebrate National Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. So you are in the right place. We are going to be talking about the Rural Collaborations to End Teen Dating Violence Toolkit. We're going to refer to that as the toolkit for today. And so you're in the right place if that's what you were hoping to get. We are coming to you from the OVW Rural Technical Assistance Provider on Teen Dating Violence, which is the Idaho Coalition, and we'll talk a little bit about our other project partners. So wanted to just give a quick nod and thank you to our funder at the Office on Violence Against Women, who allows us to have the funding to do things like this, and allows us to put together all of the resources that we're going to be sharing with you today. Moving into the day, I just wanted to do a quick intro. I'm Jessica Moreno, as Lacey mentioned, and I'm here in Texas, in Maxwell, Texas. So I was seeing a lot of Texas folks, familiar faces, and want to pass the mic to my colleague coming out of Idaho.
Good morning, my buntag. My name is Dagondon Tiegs. I use they, them pronouns. I'm with the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. I'm on Niwa Numu lands based out of Boise, Idaho. Though we travel a lot to our programs, like last week, we were just in northern Nevada on the Duck Valley Indian Res. Yeah, very excited to talk about rural communities and how to support young people from historically marginalized communities, especially during Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Dee. And Dee and I have been able to work together through this technical assistance project for a couple of years now. And our approach to this work is really, relational. We think that it's really hard to do good work without the relationships. And to kind of lean into that relationship piece, we also feel like we do some good learning when we're able to share stories. Having that personal touch point allows us to recall information in different ways. And so while we're going to be sharing a lot of content with y'all today that is you're able to refer back to in the toolkit, we're actually going to be sharing a lot of stories today. And so I first wanted to start this storytelling piece by sharing a little bit about my background. I know Lacey shared kind of, the formal spiel about who I am and what I do. And we're going to hear some of Dee's story later on in today's session. But I wanted to just kick off this celebration of National Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month by saying thank you first for your work and for all that you're doing in your rural communities to support folks experiencing violence in their relationships. This work is deeply important to me personally, not just professionally. As Lacey mentioned, I came to this work as a young person in programs, and I actually saw the program in the audience, so wanted to say, what's up, Family Place? Because that was my first introduction to violence prevention work. And at the time, we didn't have a Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. At the time, it was a program that came in and, was really working to bring young people into that peer counseling role of helping their friends out whenever they were experiencing violence in relationships, and help us to refer to some of our respective organizations. And it was really through that work, not only that I got my first taste of, public speaking and advocacy work, but it was also a space where I was brought into this work more as a colleague, and I saw for the first time, adults treat me like someone with some knowledge, right? And so it really shifted my professional career, but more importantly, under this guise of prevention education and under this guise of leadership development, my mentor at the time really helped me navigate some challenging things I was experiencing at home and in my own romantic relationship at the time. And so I start from this place to say, that your work is really important and your work has lasting impacts. And I also preface this story because all these years later, we now have a National Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month that we can lean on. But that advocacy work and that partnership work that happened from my memory here in Texas also led to really important things like, I was a high school and college student, I think, whenever we finally passed legislation in Texas that made requirements for school districts to have teen dating violence protocols and procedures in place. And that didn't just happen with adults and with advocates in the field that were doing that work. It happened because we also had really emboldened young people's voices that were also joining us at the legislature to make those calls to action. And so we want to center those voices today as we're thinking about what rural collaborations can look like, whether your collaborative effort is trying to support and provide access to care for youth survivors, or if your collaborative work is really trying to bring young people into the fold of your collaborative work. We want to talk about that, and we want to center those voices and experiences. And so I also cannot move forward without giving a nod to our other project partners from across the country. We're talking about collaboration today. And while our collaboration is not necessarily localized, it spans the country. It's a really important part of our resource and what we offer to communities when we talk about rural teen dating violence, because we have representatives like Tracy Wright in North Carolina and all of the young people that she works with and brings into this work. We have folks at like Stephanie Ortiz coming out of Wisconsin, who also does significant and meaningful work with young people, and she helps bring them into the fold of this work. I also want to give a nod to my other Texas colleague, Rita Flores, who with me at Collective Capacity, we have been doing this work both as individuals in this work, but also connected to our communities here in Texas. And then we have many other staff in addition to Dee at the Idaho Coalition. And that includes young people who've been a part of this project as paid consultants and paid staff to help us create meaningful work around teen dating violence prevention. So wanted to give all of these folks a nod and bring them into this space with us as well.
Thank you, Jess. Y'all are probably familiar with providing services, but one of the things that helps us define our work and how to move and develop our programming forwards is really starting from a new definition of teen dating violence. We really like the New York City Mayor's Office to End Domestic Violence definition of teen dating violence. And it says, a general term used to capture any type of violence rooted in exploiting unequal power relationships between genders, including gender norms and role expectations specific to society, as well as situational power imbalances and inequities. And the approach to this is that, like, what we know about violence is it doesn't happen in a vacuum. This takes account into the societal power imbalances, which allows people to cause violence to other young folks. And to think about this as a preventionist and also as a person who is providing services to young people, it really expands our work in being able to provide more holistic care, more culturally specific care to young people, especially young people in rural communities who are also from historically marginalized communities. Next slide, please. If we're not gonna, I also like to include more literal definitions of teen dating violence, since that can include stalking, technological, the use of technology with young people is vastly different. I am what would be considered the youngest millennial and or elder Gen Z. And I can see how both ends of the spectrum use technology very differently. Harassment in schools and places of work, hazing, physical, emotional, and psychological, sexual assault and rape. While these are very explicit in defining what kind of these actions are, we also believe that there are several things along the way that don't necessarily fit under laws and criteria that are moments and opportunities for intervention when there is harm going on. And so that's why I really appreciate the previous definition, because it really expands and provides us many more opportunities to intervene. Next slide. What we know about domestic violence and sexual violence programs is that it's designed for a very specific kind of person. It's usually in academic texts and how people are talking about sexual and domestic violence programs. The unfortunate reality is that it's designed for a very specific person, and that's a temporarily poor white woman who's made out to be this perfect survivor. And there are no perfect survivors. I mean, yes, all survivors are perfect, but like there's no narrative that's helpful for us as service providers to be able to operate based on the perfect survivors. Because these are designed for adult people, many young people don't necessarily see local domestic violence and sexual violence programs or even social service providers as a place for them to receive care and help. Young people are like varied on transportation, whether it be through economics or even their age and when they're allowed to drive within their state. Parent involvement laws, this tends to be a barrier for young people from reporting. When they've experienced harm, mandated reporting, that is something that is very state localized to every state. And so we have some resources later in the slide so that you can find the right resources or find the right information on your state's mandated reporting. Low financial freedom, and even the language. This is why whenever I see someone who's also bicultural and bilingual, who's able to provide meaningful, culturally relevant care, is very, very important. And so we should be paying our advocates who are bilingual more money, because that is a unique skill in being able to provide culturally specific care. Awareness of resources, I think this is really closely related to the value services for young folks. Like, even if the services are there, do they know if those services exist there for them to access? And then school involvement. Young people fear retribution, especially if the person that caused them harm is also attending the same school. Next slide.
Sure. And Dee, if I might add too,
Oh,
the reality is that, our collaborative work, while we also need to pivot, our direct service landscape and thinking about not just copying and pasting what works for adults and apply it to young people, that also needs to happen and show up in our collaborative work in our, coordinated community response teams, et cetera. And even the language of Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, we've been using that since I was a young person, and I am definitely not one anymore. And so even language like healthy relationships or dating can be somewhat antiquated among young people. And so this is an opportunity where we get to learn from young people, what the real language is and what what they think of in terms of relationships, romantic relationships, and harmful relationships.
So there are many communities, and all are not represented here when we talk about some complexities about accessing services or even prevention programming for young people from historically marginalized communities. And these are some of the communities that we're describing when we say historically marginalized communities. Black, Brown, and Indigenous young people have a fear of systems. When we definitely take a look at the criminal legal system, we know that Black, Brown, and Indigenous young folks are overrepresented in many systems that involve justice or that involve the criminal legal system. Jesse, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, I think that there is a misconception that our rural communities often look the same from community to community. I will use Texas as my example. It's a misconception that they are all homogeneously cis white folks. My family grew up in a small town called Ozona, Texas, which likes to claim it is the biggest tiny town in Texas. And upon first look, it might seem like it's a community of all white folks, and that's just not the reality. And as I've been working with Dee and the Idaho Coalition to work in other rural communities across the country, I'm learning more and more about the different makeup and representation that often gets overlooked within our rural communities across the country. And I like to use this example. We'll share some of the resources that have come out of the coalition in terms of, poster campaigns and things like that. But we were in rural Wyoming last year, and a prevention educator stopped us to let us know that she so appreciated the poster campaign, which featured visuals and graphics of real young people in Idaho, and they are made up of all kinds of folks. And the prevention educator just let us know that this was the first time she was able to share and put posters in her school community that had representation for students that looked like them. And it's 2023. We know representation matters. And sometimes those things get missed in our rural communities. And so some good questions to be thinking about as you all are doing your work deeply in rural communities is to be asking ourselves these blind spots, right? These potential blind spots. How do we center the experiences of non-white youth? How do we center the experiences of non-heterosexual youth, right? How do we center the experiences of queer and trans youth? And how do we center the experiences of young people with disabilities or who are deaf and hard of hearing? A lot of times we forget that there could be queer and trans youth in our rural communities. And even if it may not be safe at times to talk openly about those dating relationships or those identities and lived experiences, there are ways that we can, in our service provision or our prevention education or awareness, there are ways that we can be centering those experiences with using gender neutral language in our examples of what romantic relationships can look like, so that those folks see themselves in the services that are being provided, and they see themselves in the way that we are talking about dating and relationships. So these are some of the things that we have been seeing just in our work across different rural communities in the country.
Yeah, and before we go to the next slide, Jessica, I'd also like to add this specific barrier that is for queer and trans young people. What we know about rural communities is that word travels fast. And so even when a queer and or trans person is dating, they may not seek services because they may be seen and have to disclose that the person that they're seeing and causing them harm is of the same gender. And what we, and like, unfortunately for a lot of these places, we create these stories that it's not safe for queer and trans young people to even access. So we even consider that like it is multiple systems acting at the same time. And so we have to be conscious like the best that we can be to be able to welcome young people to access our services. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Sure. Yeah. And so the same thing applies, you know, when we're thinking about other historically marginalized communities in our rural community. I came from a family of migrant farm workers on my dad's side of the family. And so even though they grew up in, you know, oftentimes as ranch hands in Ozona, Texas, I remember my dad sharing stories about when they would go to Michigan for cherry picking, or when they would go to California, right? So remembering that we do have within our rural communities pockets of folks that have the experiences of being resettled or even having to migrate from community to community for their work. And so it's important that we're also asking ourselves, you know, as a collaborative and as a community of service providers, how are we making sure that we center our programming and services in ways that are culturally relevant and sensitive to folks who are resettled, or folks who may not have citizenship. And so again, these are just examples of reflective questions that you can be asking yourselves and your collaborative teams. Because if we're really trauma informed, I know lots of folks like to talk about trauma informed advocacy, but what that really means when we get in depth into our services is thinking about what trauma informed means to different folks. And so that also matters when we're thinking about justice involved youth. We know that a lot of times justice involved youth experience sexual assault at higher rates than when an adult is incarcerated. And so thinking about how we're tapping into those spaces and how we're being sensitive to what that experience is like, and oftentimes the distrust that might come along with that, and not taking it personal, right? I remember doing support groups with boys and girls groups in detention centers, and just knowing that, you know, that the response is usually not about me, right? It's not about me, Jessica. There's a lot of reasons to distrust, right? And so how can we approach in a way that considers those experiences?
Ooh. Before I get into rural young folks, I'd also like to add, like, when young people are reporting and or seeking services, they are very afraid, regardless of not if they have citizenship or residency, of being deported, not just them alone, but also their entire family if they have mixed residency or citizenship status. And that is a barrier. Like it sucks for a young person to be able to consider, like, if I access these services, will it put my family at risk? And that's not necessary. And we think that there's a different world where we can provide culturally relevant programming and or services for young people to feel safe when they do come to us for services. One thing that I also am learning through stories is that when we think about axes of oppression, we don't necessarily talk about rurality as an axis of oppression. And this is very evident in the kind of services that young people are able to access when they've experienced harm in rural communities. Like, for example, urban young folks are more likely to access services after experiencing teen dating violence that are healing-based through counseling and or either through group therapy or something like that. But rural young people are more likely to have interventions that involve the criminal legal system. And so no contact orders and things like that. And we're not saying one is better than the other. It's just that we can provide more options for young people in both urban and rural settings. And we already have the tools that tell us how to provide how to provide culturally relevant care specific to young people in rural communities. We just have to talk to each other. Like the thing that we try to approach in our technical assistance programming is that you're coming to us as also experts in your community. And so we are just here to provide like some context or share experiences that we've heard of from other people that have requested technical assistance from us. And that's what I'd like to highlight is like, you are also experts. And we believe you when you tell us stories and very specific challenges to your community.
Thank you for mentioning that, Dee, because we also want to invite you all. We know there were, I think, over 200 folks registered for this webinar, and that can make it really difficult to have a two-way conversation. But we definitely want to invite you all as much as possible to chime in to the chat and share with us what your experiences have been. If there are some barriers that are unique to your rural community, we want to hear about that. If there are some strategies that you all are using that have worked well around these issues, we definitely want to hear that. This is a place not only for you all to do some learning and connecting, but as Dee mentioned, it's a space for us to do learning and connecting as well. And through this, we can share some resource amongst each other. So please feel free to add in to the chat your thoughts, your questions, your strategies as we're continuing this conversation. Let's see. So with that, now you're going to start seeing some graphics. Again, these are pulled, all of the reflective questions and the graphics that you're seeing in the slide deck. They're all coming from the toolkit. And I'm going to go ahead and drop or Dee, if you wouldn't mind dropping the toolkit link in the chat for folks. Again, this is for you to refer back to, so we're not going to go through every single item in detail, but we wanted to give you a sense of kind of that bird's eye view or the big picture of these resources. And so we talked a lot about, what young people's unique experiences can be in our communities. And so, all of you are part of rural collaborations in your own communities. And so we wanted to share a little bit about thinking about potential collaborators. Maybe they're already on your collaborative team and maybe they're not. And so we want to think about, depending on what your goal is, we might be able to tap into different types of folks in your community. And I like to share the example of a community here in Texas that, they're semi-rural, but wouldn't consider themselves very rural. and one of the schools had students that were interested in mock trial. And there was an attorney who was helping with that, who also had some lived experience and background in supporting survivors of domestic and sexual assault in their legal proceedings. And so a really cool thing that came out of that is now they have a teen dating violence mock trial. So every February, they work on a teen dating violence case, and the mock trial team works this case, works to prepare it in front of a jury of their peers. And at the end of it, they actually end up doing an awareness and prevention education presentation afterwards to talk a little bit about the realities of these kinds of cases. And so again, right, it could be tapping into what already exists in your community, what initiatives or projects are already there, and bringing other folks into the fold. And so if you are thinking more about doing collaborative work around awareness raising, I would ask you, do you have young people on your collaborative team? Because they know more about what's going to work and what's not going to work in terms of grabbing them and their peers' attention. And if you don't already work with young people, how could you, right? There are lots of opportunities to get involved with the adults in young people's lives that are already have their foot in the door with young people. So that could be anywhere from working with the traditional school administrators, but I would say think about folks like the adult leaders of student clubs and student council, student organizations, and extracurricular activities like 4-H. We also think that this is a great opportunity to engage faith-based youth groups and the leaders of those youth groups, right? Because these are all folks that already have touch points in young people's lives. And the reality for youth is that, if we are talking about healthy relationships, but we return them back to a community that at large doesn't speak that same language, then we're doing a disservice for young people. And so all of us could potentially be a touch point in young people's lives. And so thinking about matching your collaborative partners with the type of work that you're hoping to do. So the toolkit will walk you through some of those different options. And double checking. Okay, wanted to check the chat real quick. So once you have a sense of who your collaborators are, I would say that, our collaborative work, again, is only as good as our relationships. And so it's really important that a lot of times we'll have a lead agency, and I'll use us as an example, Dee. So Idaho is our lead agency. And it'd be one thing, oftentimes what happens is the lead agency or the lead collaborator comes up with the agenda, comes up with the project, comes up with what we're going to do, and then just disseminates it to the rest of the collaborative to implement. But the reality is true collaboration works well when we are all on board. And so the toolkit will guide you through some reflective questions to assess your readiness for a given project, whether that is something that's more awareness raising, or if it is more rooted in how to get services and care actually into the hands of young people. And so depending on what your goal is, it's really important to go through this reflective process with your full collaborative team, because it's an opportunity to strengthen the relationship and make sure we're all moving towards the same goal and the same vision. And when we think about, our experience, we're going to share in just a little bit about how we've walked ourselves through some of these reflective practices and reflective questions. So you'll kind of get to hear a little bit of what that's been like for us. But the reality is, if we're able to do that together, it's easier to fold folks into that work. For example, if you want to fold young people into that work, we can bring them on board and really really genuinely ask these questions of them too. We want to know, why is collaboration important to young people? Why would they want to hang out with us? And think about and grapple with these big structural challenges or these big issues in our communities. So we want to know not just why is it important to Jessica and Dee, but why is it important to this young person? That relationship piece is so important.
Ooh, that's so, so important. The relationship piece is, I think, one of the best things. Like our relationship with young people has to transcend the projects that we produce. So like we have to have meaningful relationships so that when the project does end or when the grant does end, what meaningful relationship is or like kept even after that project is complete. And like I would add, like as we're rewriting this document, I really want to add a piece around like, are you prepared to fail? And I can share a little bit about the Idaho Coalition's failures. We like to call them as critical learning moments. Is like, yes, we'll make mistakes. And I think it's, I think we make bolder decisions and more revolutionary decisions or transformative decisions in our programming and in our services if we allow ourselves to make that mistake. The importance of shared relationships, shared meaningful relationships with young folks is that when we do come up with mistakes, come to mistakes or critical learning points. I'm mocking it, but it's actually a really helpful framework in my head. Is that like no one person has to bear the brunt of the not intended outcome. We can all share our experiences and try to figure out together how we could have avoided this moment forwards and share that learning with each other so that we don't have to make that mistake in the future, even if people move on to different projects.
Thanks, Dee. That brings up those realities, right, of our funding sources, and things happen sometimes. There are additional goals and additional kind of outside collaborators that are influencing our work as well. And so it can make this a tall order. And it's one of the reasons why we really truly do believe in this reflective practice. And so one of the other kind of reflective practices and readiness assessment tools within the toolkit is using Hart's ladder of youth participation and engagement. This is a body of work that's been around for a while, but we've taken it and adapted it a little bit for our purposes at the coalition and on this TA project. But really, Hart's ladder of engagement is an opportunity for us to reflect on what we say we're doing and what we're actually doing. So a lot of times we think we are partnering with young people in a meaningful way and giving them lots of autonomy to make decisions, but in reality, it could be tokenizing. And so this assessment kind of walks you through, what those differences are. What is the difference between youth as a token participant and young people initiating and directing the decisions of the work? And this is not meant to shame anybody or where you're at, but it helps us think about, like, where am I on this ladder and where do I want to be? And for different projects or different initiatives, it might call for a different rung, and that's okay. So I would argue that it's never okay to tokenize a young person, and I know that it happens all too often. But what we really want to move towards, rather than tokenizing, is to a place of informed consent. And so if we are being transparent with young people and we say, hey, this is a press conference, you can't do any talking, you can't prep the speech, but we'd love you to show up and support and be part of the photo op, if we're being transparent about that, then a young person can genuinely decide if they want to join or not join. right? Just as you would ask Jessica if she wants to join or not join, right? So being transparent allows us to move away from that tokenization and really move into more of an authentic, transparent relationship with our youth collaborators. And so I love these questions, or I love this ladder because it allows us to just think about, for this project, I might need a little less, youth directed engagement. But this project, if we really want this to be youth led, we really want this to be, strong youth decision making, then what do we need to do differently as a collaborative to move in that direction? And what's been really cool is there have been times where we have this conversation with a group of young people that we're working with who can tell us very honestly, nah, Jessica, we are not operating at the higher rungs. Like, this really did feel, more of a tokenized experience, or this really felt like you were assigning work for me and I'm okay with that. Or you're assigning work for me when you really told me I had full autonomy, right? So this just gives us language to really be reflective about the kinds of work we're doing and where we want to move and grow. So now we're going to get into, again, kind of, Dee's going to share a little bit about what the experience has been in Idaho's journey, using some of these reflective practices. And again, we try, we reflect, and then we try again.
Right. And I think, I really, if there's one thing that I could change about the world that we live in, is normalizing failure. And even in our storytelling in the beginning, particularly in the nonprofit world where we are accountable to funding and have to ensure that people still get paid, we didn't necessarily share our mistakes with each other for fear that those funding would be taken away from us. And that's a very real concern that a lot of us have to navigate every day. Like, I wish we didn't have to worry about money, but I do think we can share our learning moments and also contribute to a new culture around failure. At the very beginning, we started engaging young folks from not historically marginalized communities, young folks who were traditionally successful. And so because of the kind of work that we set out for them in just reviewing documents, in doing public speaking when they were asked to, we leaned towards young folks who were children of lawyers and doctors who are also on student council, like the excellent students. What we know now is that if we have our services be informed by young people from these privileged experiences, those services aren't going to include the experiences of historically marginalized communities. And that's no shade against the young folks who started this work, because without them, that would not have initiated this rollout to where we started working with historically marginalized communities. And even the skills that were traditionally that we sought after was traditional reading, writing, and speaking skills. And those leave out a lot of young folks. And I, as a young person who's also started in this movement in 2015, I am also that person who's able to speak well relatively as I stumble through my words, but also read and write well and digest information in traditionally valuable skills. What we wanted to do at this moment in time was to engage young people who were not engaged in the conversation, that we were doing. Primarily, our programming and our marketing and our poster designs was rooted in fear-based rhetoric about teen dating violence. We didn't allow or it was always about statistics, which doesn't necessarily change and shift the culture that young people are experiencing. Next slide. What I will share that was really successful about this early moment in our development was we started engaging young people through art and storytelling. And this really changed our perspective on how to engage young people. We, in our stories of transformation, we've called it our writing challenge. We do it every year to all secondary schools in the state of Idaho. And it serves as twofolds for us. It serves, one, it lets us young people, well, let me talk about the writing challenge first. So we come up with themes for young people to talk about healthy relationships. In the past, we've talked about young people's interconnection to each other, young people's interconnection to the earth and their communities. This year, we talked about well, that was last year. Is it in right relationship? Yeah, in right relationship. What does those in right relationships look like? Not just as dating partners, but also the partner or the friends that they have in their lives. What do those healthy relationships look like that they can replicate in their dating experiences? This program that we do with secondary schools, in middle school, high school, young people in juvenile detention centers, and like after school programming allowed us to literally see into the young people's minds. How are they perceiving the relationships that they have with each other? And this is just a mass aggregate data. And some of the poems that they write for us in 75 words, not related to our topics at all. But a lot of them we started learning about how shame was deeply related to teen dating violence, and how they felt most supported after experiencing harm when they were celebrated for their talents and when they're celebrated for their agencies. So we publish 100 young people from middle school and junior high and 100 young people in high school, and we pay them for their work when they get published. If they make it into our book, they get a $25 check. If they make it into the top 10, they get a $250 check in the mail. And so we are even paying young people for their expertise when they are sharing us through art. The cool thing about this is that in the spring, we ask young people to illustrate. And you see in the background here, that is chalk art that was created or inspired by another young person's poem. So these were teams of young people who made chalk art, and we also offer prizes for them for participating and when they make it into our book. And so we are engaging young people through the literary arts, which is really, really cool because not everyone talks best or writes best or are able to inform through like academic, like this caused this, and then, but they could tell us through their stories and their feelings about what they were experiencing. And we also engage visual artists in the conversation about healthy relationships because they were engaging the text with text that their peers developed. And now we get to experience and celebrate both different communities who are more likely to engage in conversations with us about healthy relationships and teen dating violence. Next slide.
I love when you share this story, Dee, because I think about how powerful that experience could be for young people. And I'm curious to know, just thinking about our audience, who were some key collaborators to pull something like this off? Obviously, there were some young people that were our collaborators, but who were some of the other key collaborators that allow y'all to pull this event off every year as a statewide event?
Ooh, okay. Yes, so even the prompts are developed with young people, but in the prompts, it's now become to be an intergenerational partnership in drafting the prompts for young people to really get at those juicy questions. We've employed Idaho's previous writer in residence, Malia Collins, as a person who, as she's an adult, who is recognized in our community to be a person that's celebrated through her poems and her works. But what I will say is the most valuable partners that we have are teachers, particularly teachers in rural communities. We have teachers driving in for during our poetry reading, more than 150 miles, driving in their own cars, sometimes renting out their own buses, just for their young people in rural communities to be able to read their 75-word poem, which are great. And I think if it describes the kind of relationship that we have with these teachers, we get several messages if we're behind a week on releasing the poems about, are you doing the challenge this year? My students are very excited to do it. But it also lets young people from rural communities to see themselves in literature because their friends got published. And it's a really big deal for some rural communities who have very little opportunities to engage through the arts. And we also try to make an incentive for teachers. Like we provide a stipend for teachers who, knowing that the education funding in a lot of states are not great, are not great. So they're even participating in this. In the past, we've related this to the state education standards to teach these lessons in schools for teachers, health teachers, English teachers, counselors to engage their young folks. What we eventually found out was like, they just learned to trust us, and now they don't even want to see the standards that we're relating to the poetry.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Thank you for giving a nod to all of those community collaborators. I think the only other thing I would add to this story about kind of the early learnings of youth work in Idaho was just a personal reflection. And I think we've talked about this in the past, Dee, that I was remembering, I was, that the smart student, right? And early on in the program I was involved in, they recruited through AP classes or advanced placement classes. And so obviously you're going to get the advanced placement students. And it was a great space to be in. However, I realized that a lot of my friends, who are my neighbors and the people I grew up with, were not reflected in that space. And I really wanted to bring them into the fold. And so, I think this has been a lot of our initial learning as we begin to do work with young people, to think about how we're recruiting from different groups and making sure that there are opportunities for young people that may have less access. So I appreciated that early learning. So if we can transition to talking a little bit about the middle and what you all taking that learning from the initial stage and how you made changes and adaptations.
Yeah, and one thing I will add to about even in adjudication or like even evaluating the young folks' poems and submissions that they made, we really saw the inequities in the education curriculum or in education in rural communities. Like if school funds are generated through property taxes, like in rural communities, there aren't a lot of property for them to be able to tax. And so we had to correct and account for and ensure that young people from rural communities, not that there weren't any exceptions, we also had to come to Jesus with ourselves about why are we judging in a certain type of way, and why are we still continuing to value eloquent, well-spoken young people even in writing. That was in late 2000s. And then now we get into 2014, 2015, when your girl started working at the Idaho Coalition. And this was really transformed, initiated by our executive director then, and is still our current director, Kelly Miller, who went through the Move to End Violence cohort number 2, who really started initiating conversations with programs and advocacy organizations around the country is about what it means for us as service providers to provide more meaningful care to historically marginalized communities. Yes, to young people who are from traditionally successful families, but what we also had to do is like to ensure that young people were engaging with us in the ways that they felt most comfortable. We had to hire young people outside of the, in addition and outside of the traditionally successful young people. And this requires a collaborative too, because yes, I have connections to the queer and trans community, but no, I don't have connections to young people with disabilities and young people with developmental disabilities. But we do have partners who do work with young people with developmental disabilities and physical disabilities. And what we were able to do in these kind of meaningful partnerships with partner organizations who aren't even related to teen dating violence, who don't do work with teen dating violence, is that we can access each other's networks and also be informed so when we do engage young people with disabilities, we know what not to do in a basic 101 level. Like, obviously we'll get better. I don't know anything about disability justice, but in meaningful relationships with young folks, we can learn more through the partnerships that we have with our organizations. We started looking at the numbers and the academic literature, and then starting to put together this picture that people from historically marginalized communities and are members of multiple historically marginalized communities, not just race, but also gender, sexuality, citizenship, disability, and that's not even all of the factors, is like we are seeing that these systems increases the likelihood of a young person to experience violence. And that was a key critical learning moment too, because traditionally our youth engagers, are people who were working with our young people during this time, were also from traditionally successful families. So we even had to like deliberately recruit more people from historically marginalized communities as a part of our programming to work with the young folks. As a young person who saw the switch from, who saw that there were more brown people who were being hired at the coalition for programming with young people, I felt more comfortable about giving out my opinions and being my fullest self in that institution. Jessica, do you have anything to add?
We have a question that we can get to in just a bit, but I also wondered if you can talk a little bit about, you know, kind of that transition to this middle knowledge space and what this taught you all about adultism. I know you're kind of alluding to that now in talking about you felt more able to show up as your fuller and entire self and more authentic self. But I'm wondering if for anybody who may not be familiar with the terminology around adultism, if we can touch on that a little bit too.
Yeah. So adultism is systemic ways where we disprivilege young people from participating in the systems that adults are able to participate in. In the early 1990s, the UN passed a resolution that allowed young people under the age of 18 to vote within their communities, but it was localized to either like programming specific to their village or community, but they also engaged them in being able to vote about their education XYZ. There was one nation who did not sign this resolution, and I'll let you guess which one it was. But like in ways that we systemically disempower young people from participating. I guess another example of this is that also prevents young people from reporting or like telling us that they need help is that we literally tell young people to be quiet when adults are talking. Like these are the cultural ways that we systemically disempower young people. And the only reason I showed up for this internships interview was because they approached young people as experts. They weren't paying well. They weren't paying well, but a friend of mine in high school who was a part of the program already asked me if I was thinking, I think I was junior, no. Yeah, what comes up before junior? Sophomore. I was a sophomore in high school, and this person, who's my dearly beloved friend, and still to this day, was asking about if I had considered any internships. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I have things to study, and I have a job elsewhere. But when they said that the opportunity was also paid, I submitted an application, and a week later, I was hired onto the Idaho Coalition's youth programming. We really have to trust young people in being able to know the culture that they live in. And like, I'm 25, so elder Gen Z, youngest millennial. And I am quickly not learning the language that young people are experiencing. I am not surrounded by young people every day, or for the majority of my day. And like their social media cycles through their culture way more quickly than I can keep up. And that's why we have to pay young people for their expertise, is because they are experts in what's happening within their communities. Ooh, go ahead.
This is actually a good time to raise one of the questions we got in the Q&A portal, and please feel free, friends, to keep sending these questions our way. This person is asking if we talk a lot about paying students and stipends for teachers and other financial benefits. And we know that a lot of organizations have very limited and low funding. I also want to recognize, the economic, issues that we're going through right now, and just know that folks have very minimal resources. And so if we can share a little bit about how we've been able to provide funds to students and to teachers or collaborators, I think now would be a good time to address this piece of the question. And I can just share, there are some grant funds that are out there available that are specific for youth work. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Children, Youth and Engaging Men grant out of the Office on Violence Against Women. But that I know a lot of programs across the country that have been able to get access to those funds can use some of those funds to contract their students. And then I will also speak to some of the experiences I've had in terms of fundraising. So a lot of times I've worked with a body of young people who want to fundraise or are interested in fundraising. And what we'll often say is that those funds be earmarked for the prevention programming specifically, and they're not raised for the organization at large. They're raised specifically for the programs that youth are a part of. And so we've been able to make that happen. There are often a lot of smaller donors or foundations that want and get energized by providing funding specifically for children and youth. And so there could be some opportunities there. But I mean, even things like I've had students who organize like a Wear Orange Day or something like that in a school that might have a dress code, and they'll have everyone pay $1 or 50 cents to wear orange. And it may seem like not very much money, but over time when we do these things, one, we're prioritizing young people's ability to to fundraise for the things they want to see, and there's a whole skill set that we're learning there, but at the same time we're also building up our nest egg to do the kinds of work that we want to do with young people. And Dee, I don't know if you want to share any other ideas that y'all have learned over the years.
Yes. This is a great question, and I'm sorry I didn't address that. But this is why an intergenerational partnership, I'm going to talk about this in the next slide, is really critical to our work. Like, our work cannot be done in the silos of our programs. Like our community has to know about this. I say we utilize that we are 501c3 and provide rich people tax deductible write-offs. And that's why we have to engage everyone within our communities. I also highly recommend looking into foundations within your communities. There are very specific ones just to rural communities and favor rural applicants in that way. But to work our way up into these big federal funds, you have to have like this established system. But there's always a place and time for fundraising, and like it's also a transmittable experience for young people to fundraise. What I will also say is that it took us to be also very creative with our funding. When we started applying for these big grants, federal grants and foundations, we integrated young people into our budget. And so that's took us to be looking down the 3 to 5 year line so that we can be more receptive to when these programs do allow us to pay young people and integrate them into the budget. Yes, policy change. And I could talk about that in this a little bit. Sorry, I get distracted very easily. It's unfortunate that we have to think about this in prevention programming. There's a huge difference between in funding services and prevention. And we often see that prevention often gets deprioritized. But what we encourage our programs to do is to start writing narratives in their grants to diminish the distinguishing between prevention and services. And the way that we explain this to our grant managers is that when we do traditionally prevention programming in rural communities and in schools, it's also when young people seek out services because they don't know those services are available to them unless we do these traditionally prevention programming. So it also requires us as people who facilitate the container that young people are able to empower themselves with and like develop their agency in programming to take risks with our funders, and wholly try to explain to them why funding needs to change and or be more creative in how we explain what we're doing and why it's critical to our work in prevention and response. Could you move to the next slide?
Yes.
The previous one.
Oh, the previous slide.
So this is an example of the young people that we organized every 2 weeks. Oh no, it was every week. About 40 young people. This was pre-pandemic, so that's why we're not wearing masks. Where we had a really high retention rate. Like at most during our meetings, we would have 5 young people not showing up. But we started approaching young people in our programming in their holistic selves. We started being attentive to their bodily needs. Like for example, in our programming, it can't be traditional ways of teaching where we just like open their heads and dump information in. We had to allow them to tell their stories and tell us through stories about what they know about their communities, because that's a more meaningful way for them to tell us the information and also for us to learn about them and what's happening within their communities. We approach them as whole human beings. So we never had anything on the slides. We engaged them mostly in circles where there were no barriers between us as facilitators and also like everyone was on this same equal physical level. And then we were able to provide food for them through partnerships with local businesses. In these, like local businesses love to, at least in our community, I don't know about all communities, local businesses love to support our work because they see the benefits of making our communities safer in prevention programming. Next slide, please. What we are working towards is this intergenerational partnership of young people. very quickly go through this so that we can make room for questions at the end. What we know about gender violence was that it didn't happen in a vacuum. The systems that we exist in that produce violence within our communities was there at the conception of our country. Like gender violence was integrated into the enslavement of West Africans. Gender violence was integrated into the displacement and the removal of indigenous people in the United States. As much as I love to believe that we can change if we all got on the same boat and we all just had the same right conversation, gender violence is not ending tomorrow. And so when we invest in intergenerational partnerships, we are raising the next generation or next generations, if we can, hopefully, to be able to address the problems within their communities and equip them most when they are most receptive to social change. Like every single social movement in US American history was started by young people. And so instead of seeing young people as unstable or too emotional, I think that young people are more human than adults, because like we learn to hide our feelings about injustice as adults just to function in everyday life. And I think that's what young people can provide for us as a movement. And what we can provide for young people is the guidance. Like for example, our executive director, Kelly, is in her late 50s. I'm so sorry if I got that wrong. Who is well-versed in the gender-based violence and grew up in the second wave feminism. And she knows more about the funding streams than I do. In our intergenerational partnership, I can try to communicate to her what young people are doing on the ground and find those opportunities because she has those national networks who are willing to fund creative prevention programming. Next slide.
Yeah, and I think this next slide and story will actually get at one of the questions in the chat around any experience we've had in participating in policy change or policy advocacy with young people. And I can speak a little bit to what that's looked like and some things happening in Texas, but thought this would be a really great segue to this slide.
Yes, so in our work, with young people, when Dr. Christine Blasey Ford was testifying and for Supreme Justice Judge Kavanaugh and the allegations against him being sexually assaulting and causing harm to 15-year-old girls, we did have 15-year-old girls. And in the intergenerational partnership, like we asked these three young people, Layla, Jessica, and Roy, to tell us their experiences in school. They were wanting to tell a story about like how they should be most concerned about the tests, not for fear of being sexually assaulted in their schools. In our loving trust with these young people, we're able to launch a campaign within 3 days because we have staff writers and Malia Collins, who I mentioned earlier, Idaho writer in residence, draft together this story about what 15-year-old girls should be most concerned about. They should be most concerned about their tests. They should be most concerned about like finding themselves as human beings and growing and developing into the adults that they are becoming. And that's like, and it received a lot of co-signers on change.org. I think we received over 100,000 signatures. But the reason why we highlight this story is like, this could have only happened if the young people trusted us. And this is what would have only happened if we collaborated with organizers who knew how to navigate the internet and get the word out there for defining what these 15-year-old girls defined safety within their schools.
Thanks, Dee. And Layla is actually a staff now at Idaho Coalition who co-facilitates with us often on the rural Teen DV project. I wanted to share a little bit too about some of the work, that I am aware of being done in Texas, and really there in other parts. Like if we look to any social justice movement, you could easily point out young people who were at the start of it or were actively involved in building momentum, whether we're talking about civil rights or we're talking about environmental justice, right? There are young people at the forefront of these policy and advocacy changes. And I alluded to this earlier, but even in my own story, I started getting engaged with legislative advocacy here in Texas, and I know the state coalitions here in Texas do have space and platforms for young people to get involved with what's going on in our field, and get involved in the legislative advocacy that's happening here. Currently, I'm also aware of an organization that I work really closely at Jane's Due Process. Students have taken up a lot of care around parental involvement laws. So we are about to be at time. So I want to transition a little bit to talking about, sample policy language. But the story that's coming to my mind right now is that one of the biggest barriers for young people in accessing care is the fact that they cannot often access counseling services without a parent's consent. And the same is true for most of their healthcare decisions and options. And so if you have a young person who maybe have parents who are incarcerated, or they might be homeless and not living with parents, or they just have a disengaged or uninvolved parent, this makes care, access to care, really, really challenging. And so I know that here in Texas and many other states, young people are really rallying around parental involvement laws to try and show that it's really important for them to be able to have some ability to make decisions about their lives when it comes to their healthcare and their mental health care. And it was young people who have energized the issues around, I will speak for Texas, we have had school district policies mandated around addressing teen dating violence, and young people were involved in that advocacy. But now, many years later, we have also seen that the implementation is different depending on the school district. And so I've even seen young people rally around that issue and talk to their legislators about the gaps in how this policy is being implemented here. I could also look to our colleagues at Girls for Gender Equity that are doing national advocacy and policy work, and Safe Bay, that is an organization founded by youth survivors of sexual assault, who do a lot of advocacy and around Title IX and all of the work that can be done in schools around sexual assault prevention education. So yeah, I think that there's lots of opportunities for young people to tap into that. And the reality is, whether we invite them or not, they're going to take matters into their own hands. So that's also really important to note. I again just want to spend just a couple of brief moments letting you know that the toolkit does have sample language for confidentiality policies and mandatory reporting policies. But the most important thing I want to mention about these things is that, it's important to repeat this conversation, whether you are in a direct service role with youth, or if you are in a partnership role and actively collaborating with youth, that you have these conversations with them often and you remind them often. The most important thing I want to point out about the policy samples that we've provided is this option that young people have the option to continue to disclose or not. And that is so important because they have such little autonomy over the decisions being made in their lives, that, again, it's helpful to make sure that we're repeating you know, this could be something that I'm reported to share, you know, would you like to continue talking about this? It's important that we give those options to youth so that they have a right to know how their words are going to be used. And then if and when a report needs to happen, that we do some support and follow-up care with them. We help them prepare for what that experience will be like, whether that's through role play and follow up, and just creating an emotional space to process. These things are so important and necessary when we're collaborating with young people. And, you know, ultimately it's an opportunity to build trust from the very beginning of our relationship, and to maintain that trust, even when a potential disclosure might occur. So wanted to give that nod because I know we get a lot of questions around these pieces. So just know that those are in the toolkit for you to refer back to. And then there's also a bunch of different referral sources if you are not a direct service provider, that you can help connect young people to. Let's see, we have Dee about 5 minutes, 6 minutes. There's a question in the chat that I would like us to get to. So what do you think? Should we start there and then talk about resources?
Ooh, I could just talk about the resources really quick. If you take your phones out and scan the QR codes, all of our materials are free to OVW rural grantees and OVW potential grantees, which I think includes everyone. All of our materials are free, depending on your status as a grantee or not of OVW, we will pay for your shipping as well. This is a very important question. I've been like simmering on how to respond to this. The question is, at what age should we speak to young children about gender violence? I think our role as adults and people who are who exist in the to ensure that young people are safe, that no conversation is too early for young folks. What does matter is to be able to provide that conversation in ways that are developmentally appropriate. Like for young people, what I've seen in gentle parenting and liberated parenting is that we encourage young people to decide whether they want to hug a family member or not. And that teaches them about consent and agency, so that they know. But what I think about that lesson is that it also teaches us as adults during that time. Like, yes, it's sweet to hug our children, but who are the young people in our lives? Do they even want to hug us at all? And so that starts to begin to change in culture about young people that's developmentally appropriate for them. At a young age. You don't have to talk about sexual violence, but you do have to talk about what agency looks like and what it means for them to be respected as full human beings, even when they are toddlers and young.
Thanks for that, Dee. I don't have anything to add to that piece, but if you do need support thinking about like what curriculum or resources are out there for talking to younger students, I know that's something we could think about with you. There's some really great resources coming out of Promising Futures, which is a project of Futures Without Violence. I can add to the chat. And I believe the Texas Coalition also has a curriculum listserv that you can search by age. So there are definitely some things out there if you don't want to go the conversation alone. But I think that's right. You know your relationship with your young people. And so just thinking about how you want to have that conversation. There's relationship examples in children's TV shows all the time that we can lean on to spark these conversations too and make it relevant to their lived experiences. So yeah, I would be happy to think with y'all on that some more too. when we're thinking about the resources that Dee shared and a lot of our experiences working with youth, a lot of them are more geared for middle school and high school age students. And that includes this year's Teen Dating Violence Awareness Campaign theme of accountability and healthy relationships. So this content is made more for middle and high school students, but there is a toolkit, a discussion guide, and a poster campaign this year for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And this was made in partnership and highly revised and edited that you can use in schools. So all of these things are available at the QR code that Dee shared, and we'll share that hyperlink in the chat as well. But we thought it was important to focus on accountability, because a lot of us say this word a lot, but we don't know how to break down what that really means in practice. And so, feedback leaning on last year's campaign of being in right relationship, accountability is a part of that. It's not just for folks who use violence, it's for all of us, because conflict happens in relationships, even in healthy relationships. And so, again, all of the folks featured in this campaign are young people from Idaho, and these are all resources that are available to you for free. So Yvonne, I know you asked about things getting into the public school system. These are strategies or resources that you can use in a school system. And Dee and I and the rest of our team are available to you if we need to do some more one-on-one strategizing around how to get your foot in the door within your local school system. I know there's lots of ideas probably from folks in the room too. We have office hours once a month. So if you want to join us for something as casual as an office hour, we could do that. We also have done, some localized learning collaboratives with folks that are working on a similar project or are working in a similar community to help folks think about strategies to whether it's getting your foot in the door at a school or whether it's, troubleshooting a challenge within your collaborative partnerships on your CCR teams. So reach out to us. We are here to support. And I know we are at time. So I see Lacey. I know you had some last thoughts that you had to add. Oh, go for it.
Yeah, I have to bounce, but thank you so much for our time today. I have to jump on another webinar. Toodles.
Thanks, Dee. And I'll stay back in case there are other questions that pop up. And Lacey, I know you had some other reminders you wanted to share with folks.
Yes. Thank you so much. This has been great information. Really appreciate y'all's expertise. So yeah, I'm going to share. We do have an upcoming webinar again next month, and great webinar on the National Network for Safe Communities. It's a program out of John Jay College. Is going to discuss intimate partner violence intervention. If you're familiar with the High Point model, it's similar in nature to that. So would love for you to join us again. Feel free to use that QR code or go to our website in order to register. So that'll be on March 22nd at 1:30 Central Time. So would love for you to join us there. And then attendees, thank you all for joining us. At the end of today's webinar, a survey will populate in your browser. So please take a few moments to complete it in order to receive your certificate. That is how you will receive your certificate. And the survey link will also be sent in a follow-up email. Please take a moment, even if you don't really need the certificate, to go ahead and complete that. Jessica and Dee both are on VW funding, loves to ask for reporting. And so it will definitely help them in their reporting to the funder. And then finally, we hope that you'll join us this year at the Conference on Crimes Against Women. Our conference is May 22nd through the 25th. You won't want to miss it. They definitely have some rural sessions planned for you. And for more information, visit conferencecaw.org, or again, you can use the QR code to be able to register. And then a recording of today's presentation will be available on ICCR's website within 24 hours. So I think that's it. If you need anything else, please feel free to reach out. Jessica, looks like got lots of thanks and kudos in the chat today. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great day. Bye.